The moment I saw her name on the application, my heart stopped. Audrey Calloway. The same name I'd seen countless times lighting up my husband's phone at 2 a.m. The same name attached to emails with subject lines like, "Missing you already," and "Last night was incredible." I'd memorized everything about her from my late-night investigations. 26 years old, marketing graduate, social media influencer, with exactly 12,437 followers when I last checked. And now, by some cosmic joke, she was applying to be my executive assistant at the very advertising agency I'd built from the ground up. I remember sitting in my corner office, staring at her resume while twirling my wedding ring. 10 years of marriage reduced to a pathetic cliché. The successful 38-year-old businesswoman with the wandering husband who fell for someone younger. How original, Richard. How utterly, devastatingly predictable. Ms. Bennett, should I schedule interviews for these top candidates? My HR director stood at my door, waiting for instructions. I slid Audrey's application across my desk with deliberate slowness. This one interests me. Put her at the top of the list. But she has the least experience of all the... I have a feeling about her potential, I replied, my voice steady despite the hurricane forming in my chest. Sometimes you just know. The morning of her interview, I changed my outfit 3 times. I finally settled on a charcoal gray Armani suit I'd never worn before, one Richard had never seen. I pulled my auburn hair into a sleek chignon and applied my makeup with surgical precision. The woman in the mirror looked powerful, controlled, unbreakable. Perfect armor for what I was about to do. Audrey arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a fast-fashion version of professional attire. Pretty in that effortless way youth provides, with honey blonde hair cascading over her shoulders and wide eyes that radiated innocent ambition. If circumstances were different, I might have liked her. "Mrs. Bennett will see you now," my receptionist announced, and I watched through my glass office wall as Audrey straightened her spine and rehearsed her smile. She had no idea who I was. That's what hit me first. My husband had obviously never shown her a photo of his wife. Never mentioned that Olivia Bennett owned one of the most successful boutique advertising agencies in Boston. Never told her that the woman he was betraying had built an empire while he played at being a supportive spouse. "Audrey, please come in." I extended my hand with a warm smile that cost me everything to maintain. "I'm Olivia Bennett. It's such an honor to meet you, Ms. Bennett. I've followed your career for years. Your campaign for Meridian Tech last year was revolutionary." She was good. Confident without being arrogant, knowledgeable about my work, eager in all the right places. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have hired her on the spot based on genuine merit. "Tell me, Audrey, what makes you think you're ready for a position with this level of responsibility?" I asked, studying her face with anthropological detachment. I know my experience might seem limited on paper, but what I lack in years, I make up for in dedication and fresh perspective. I'm willing to work harder than anyone else to prove myself. Her eyes never wavered from mine. I nodded, jotting notes on my leather-bound pad. "And your availability? This position requires flexibility. Sometimes late nights. Weekends if necessary." "I'm completely available," she responded eagerly. "No restrictions at all. No restrictions." I wondered if Richard knew she was applying for jobs that would consume the time she spent with him. Probably not. We talked for 40 minutes. I asked challenging questions, and she answered most impressively. By the end of the interview, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. She was qualified for the position, and she had absolutely no idea she was sleeping with her potential boss's husband. "I'll be honest with you, Audrey," I said as we concluded. "There are candidates with more experience, but I value drive and raw talent. I think you might be exactly what I'm looking for." The hope that bloomed on her face was almost painful to witness. "Really? That means so much coming from you. We'll be in touch very soon," I promised, walking her to the door. As we shook hands goodbye, I noticed she wore the same perfume I'd smelled on Richard's shirts, the same scent that had kept me awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done wrong. 3 days later, I called her myself to offer her the position. Her squeal of delight echoed through my office as I held the phone slightly away from my ear. "When can you start?" I asked. "Immediately. Tomorrow even." The excitement in her voice was palpable. Perfect. I'm looking forward to working closely with you, Audrey. Very closely. As I hung up, I opened my desk drawer and looked at the private investigator's report I'd commissioned 3 months ago. The detailed account of my husband's affair, complete with timestamps, locations, and photographs. I closed the drawer slowly and smiled. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. For the first time since discovering Richard's betrayal, I slept soundly that night. Not because I had found peace, but because I had found purpose. The game had begun, and only I knew the rules. Audrey's first day was a masterclass in irony. She arrived 30 minutes early, clutching a leather portfolio I later discovered was a gift from Richard. The same Richard who'd told me he needed to work late the night before. The same night he'd apparently been giving her a pep talk for her new job. With his wife. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. I've prepared some ideas for the Harrington account, she announced eagerly, pulling out meticulously crafted presentation boards. Impressive initiative, I replied, genuinely surprised by her thoroughness. Let's review them over lunch. Our working relationship developed with unsettling ease. Audrey was smart, hardworking, and intuitive. Qualities I might have nurtured under different circumstances. She stayed late without complaint, absorbed feedback like a sponge, and anticipated my needs before I voiced them. If she wasn't destroying my marriage, she would have been the perfect protégé. Meanwhile, at home, Richard became increasingly distracted. His business trips multiplied, his late nights grew later, and his kisses became perfunctory, the kind you give to a relative you don't particularly like but are obligated to acknowledge. "How's your new assistant working out?" he asked one evening, his interest too pointed to be casual. "Audrey? She's surprisingly capable," I answered, watching his face carefully. "Though sometimes I worry she's hiding something. She gets these mysterious calls and seems anxious afterward." A flicker of concern crossed his features before he masked it. "I'm sure it's nothing. Entry-level jobs are stressful." "You're probably right." I smiled, savoring the irony he couldn't see. "By the way, I might need to keep her late this week. We're pitching to Greenwich Financial on Friday." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it surreptitiously, then frowned. "Actually, I have a dinner meeting Thursday, with the Chicago clients." "Chicago clients," I repeated. There were no Chicago clients. Of course. At work, I began assigning Audrey to projects that required evening work, precisely when she would normally be meeting Richard. I watched her send furtive texts, making excuses, rescheduling their rendezvous. The strain began to show on both of them. "Is everything all right, Audrey?" I asked one evening when I caught her crying in the restroom. "You seem troubled lately." She wiped her eyes quickly. "Just personal stuff. Nothing to worry about." "You know, I consider myself a good judge of character," I said, leaning against the sink beside her. "And I think someone's taking advantage of you." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Just a feeling. You deserve someone who puts you first, who's proud to be with you openly. Not someone who keeps you in the shadows." The direct hit landed. Her lower lip trembled. "It's complicated." "It always is," I replied softly. "Just remember, complications usually only benefit one person in the relationship." I left her there, staring at her reflection, doubt creeping into her expression, exactly as I'd intended. Over the next few weeks, I strategically shared glimpses of my personal life, just enough for her to start connecting dots. I mentioned Richard's name casually, left our anniversary photo visible on my desk, and once, accidentally, answered his call on speakerphone while she was in my office. "Hey, darling!" His voice had filled the room. "Are we still on for dinner tonight?" Audrey had frozen, color draining from her face as I calmly replied, "Of course, honey. 7 o'clock at Marcel's. Your favorite." After hanging up, I'd observed, "My husband, always confirming plans we've had for weeks. Men, right?" She'd barely managed a strangled laugh. The psychological weight began crushing her. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. Her confident posture slumped. She jumped whenever my husband's name was mentioned. Yet still, neither of them came clean. Neither had the courage to end the charade. The ultimate twist of the knife came at the company's annual charity gala. I'd been planning it for months, the perfect stage for the next phase of my orchestration. "Audrey, I'd like you to handle the VIP guest list, I instructed her 2 weeks before the event, including my husband. He's terrible about RSVPs. Her hands trembled as she took the list. Your husband will be attending? Of course. Richard never misses it. It's where we met, actually. I smiled warmly. 12 years ago. He spilled champagne on my dress, then insisted on buying me dinner to apologize. I watched realization crystallize in her eyes, the final confirmation that she'd been sleeping with her boss's husband. The man she thought might leave his wife for her was about to walk into an event where they'd have to pretend they were strangers. The night of the gala, I wore red, a backless Valentino that Richard had always loved. Audrey, stationed at the entrance with the guest list, looked like she might vomit when she saw me. You look stunning, I told her, adjusting her name tag. Are all the VIPs checked in? Almost, she whispered, just waiting for a few more. When Richard arrived, the blood drained from his face. His wife and his mistress standing side by side, one in red power, one in black misery. I kissed him publicly, possessively, watching Audrey over his shoulder as she fought to maintain composure. Darling, have you met my brilliant new assistant? I pulled back and gestured to Audrey. She's been absolutely invaluable these past 2 months. Richard's expression as he shook Audrey's hand was the portrait of a man realizing he'd engineered his own destruction. Nice to meet you, he managed. Likewise, Audrey whispered, unable to meet his eyes. Throughout the evening, I kept them in the same orbit, introducing Audrey to clients while holding Richard's arm, asking her to bring us both champagne, including her in conversations about our lake house renovations. By midnight, both were barely functioning, trapped in a nightmare of their own making. What neither of them knew was that this theatrical torment was just prologue. The real plan was only beginning to unfold. What neither Richard nor Audrey realized was that I'd been orchestrating this convergence for months before Audrey ever stepped foot in my office. The job listing she'd responded to? I'd had it placed specifically on the job boards she frequented. The position itself was crafted to match her qualifications perfectly. Nothing about our connection was coincidental. It was architectural. 3 months before hiring Audrey, I'd discovered Richard's infidelity in the most mundane way possible. He'd left his Apple Watch at home, and the notifications kept chiming with her messages while I was cleaning. 26 years in this world, and Audrey hadn't learned to avoid texting explicit content during business hours. Her timing became my advantage. Instead of confronting Richard immediately, I went into research mode. I hired Meredith Parker, a former FBI agent turned private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases. Cold, methodical, and discreet, Meredith documented their affair with clinical precision, photographing their rendezvous, recording their conversations in public places, building a comprehensive dossier on their relationship. Most clients want just enough evidence for divorce proceedings, Meredith had observed during our 3rd meeting. You're different. You're collecting intelligence like you're planning a military operation. I'd smiled. Knowledge isn't just power, Meredith. It's architectural. I'm not looking to end a marriage. I'm designing a consequence. While tracking Audrey, I discovered she had completed her marketing degree but was struggling to break into the industry. Working at a coffee shop to pay bills, sending out dozens of applications weekly, and growing increasingly desperate. Perfect. Vulnerable and ambitious. A combination that made her receptive to both Richard's attention and my career opportunity. What Richard didn't know, I'd already consulted with Patricia Abernathy, Boston's most ruthless divorce attorney, 6 weeks before hiring Audrey. Together, we'd developed a strategy that would protect my company and assets. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, Patricia had explained. But with his infidelity documented and the business predating your marriage, we can minimize his claim significantly. Patricia helped me quietly move assets, document my company's growth trajectory before and during the marriage, and prepare financial statements that clearly delineated my independent success from our joint ventures. All while Richard remained oblivious, believing his secret life was still secret. Meanwhile, I was keeping a detailed journal of every late night, every weekend golf game, every business trip that coincided with the dates and locations Meredith had documented him with Audrey. Not just for court, for myself, for the narrative I was constructing. I also began confiding in Trevor Sullivan, our company's COO and my trusted friend of 15 years. The only person besides Meredith and Patricia who knew what was happening. This is either the most elaborate self-torture or the most brilliant revenge I've ever witnessed, Trevor had said when I revealed my plan. Are you sure you want to bring this into the workplace? The workplace is where I excel, I'd responded. It's where my power lies. He invaded my marriage. I'm simply moving the battlefield to terrain that favors me. Trevor became my operational ally, helping me restructure Audrey's role to maximize her interactions with me while minimizing her contact with other staff who might inadvertently reveal too much. We created projects requiring late nights that, coincidentally, aligned with Richard's planned dates with her. Trevor also helped me prepare the company for the inevitable fallout when everything came to light. What I didn't tell Trevor was about the hidden camera I'd installed in our guest room, the room Richard had started using 3 months ago, claiming my snoring kept him awake, the same room where he'd brought Audrey twice when I was out of town at conferences. The footage wasn't for divorce court. It was leverage of a different kind. I'd also been documenting something else. Audrey's genuine talent. Despite everything, she had remarkable creative instincts. Her campaign ideas were innovative. Her grasp of digital marketing trends was intuitive. In another life, I might have been her mentor instead of her nemesis. This realization gave me the final piece of my plan, the part neither Richard nor Trevor knew about. 2 weeks after the gala, I invited Audrey to accompany me to New York for a major client presentation. Richard was relieved. It meant Audrey would be away from the uncomfortable situation at the office, and he could have time to think. What he didn't know was that the reservation was for 1 hotel room, not 2, forcing Audrey and me into close quarters for 48 hours. I hope you don't mind sharing, I said as we entered the luxurious suite at the plaza. The hotel made a mistake with our booking, and they're completely full with a convention. Audrey looked terrified but nodded. Of course not. That night, after our successful presentation, I ordered room service and opened a bottle of Cabernet. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. You know, don't you? Audrey finally whispered after her second glass, tears forming in her eyes. I set down my wine glass slowly. Know what, Audrey? About Richard. About us. Her voice broke on the last word. I didn't answer immediately, letting the moment stretch until she could barely breathe. Then I reached into my bag and placed Meredith's folder on the table between us. I knew before you submitted your job application, I said quietly. I knew where you lived, where you worked, what time you went to the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I knew your student loan debt amount and that you send money to your mother in Ohio every month. Her face crumpled in confusion, then horror as she realized the implications. You planned this? You hired me knowing? I didn't just know, Audrey. I selected you. I created the position for you. I made sure the salary was exactly what you needed to leave the coffee shop and pay your loans. Why? She whispered. Why not just fire me? Or divorce him? Why this game? I leaned forward, my voice steady. Because firing you would be quick. Divorcing him would be expected. Neither would teach the lesson I wanted to convey. I opened the folder, showing her the evidence of their relationship alongside my notes about her work performance. The irony, Audrey, is that you're actually talented. You have the potential I claimed to see in you during that interview, which brings me to why we're really in New York. I slid a sealed envelope across the table. This is where the real decision happens. Audrey's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were 2 documents. A resignation letter and a job offer from Apex Creative, our biggest competitor, based in Chicago. I don't understand, she whispered, looking up with tear-streaked confusion. It's quite simple, I replied, pouring myself another glass of wine. Option 1. You sign the resignation letter, walk away from my company with a decent reference, and disappear from both my professional and personal life forever. I tapped the second document. Option 2 is more interesting. My friend Marcus Taylor at Apex owes me a favor. He's agreed to hire you at my recommendation. Real position, competitive salary, 3,000 miles from Boston, from Richard, from me. Her eyes widened as she processed my words. You're helping me? I'm giving you a choice, I corrected her. More than you gave me. But why would you help me get another job after what I did? I studied her for a moment, seeing beyond the woman who'd slept with my husband to the ambitious, talented person who'd been manipulated by a man practiced in deception. Because Richard told you he was unhappy, didn't he? That we were practically separated. That I was cold, career-obsessed, probably having my own affair with Trevor? The shock on her face confirmed my suspicions. I've been married to him for 10 years, Audrey. You're not the first. Just the youngest. She covered her mouth, stifling a sob. There were others? 3 that I know of. Each one convinced she was special. I took a deliberate sip of wine. The difference is, you have real talent. Talent Richard will use to make you feel valued while he slowly erodes your self-worth. I slid my phone across the table, showing her text messages from Richard from that very evening. Miss you. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Thinking about leaving early. He's texting me while you're away, I explained. Doesn't mention you're with me, of course. Something hardened in her expression. The first genuine anger I'd seen from her. He said you two barely speak anymore. We had breakfast together this morning. He helped me pack for this trip. The next hour unfolded like a therapy session, with Audrey gradually realizing the extent of Richard's manipulation, how he'd synchronized his stories to keep us separated in his narrative, telling her I was away when I was home, claiming arguments that never happened, painting himself as the victim of a loveless marriage while playing the devoted husband whenever it suited him. What happens now? She finally asked, exhausted from revelations. Now you decide. Resignation or relocation. Either way, you'll be leaving my company. She stared at the documents for a long moment before looking up with unexpected resolve. What about Richard? What are you going to do to him? I smiled slightly. That's already in motion, and it's not your concern. It is my concern, she insisted, a spark of defiance in her eyes. He used me to hurt you. I want to know he pays for what he did to both of us. That was the moment my plan truly crystallized, because I hadn't anticipated Audrey's anger transforming into alliance. By morning, we had a new arrangement. She would take the Chicago job, but not before helping me complete Richard's reckoning. When we returned to Boston, Phase 2 began. Audrey continued working as my assistant, but now she was a willing accomplice. She began feeding Richard false information about my schedule, creating opportunities where he believed we wouldn't cross paths. Meanwhile, I arranged for him to accidentally discover evidence that I was preparing to expand the agency nationally, a move that would significantly increase the company's value right before what he didn't know would be divorce proceedings. The trap was elaborate but psychologically perfect. Richard, believing I was distracted by business expansion and unaware of his affair, began getting careless. He started using our shared credit card for gifts for Audrey, took less care with his excuses, and even brought her to restaurants where we were known, all documented meticulously by Meredith. What Richard also didn't know, I'd been methodically buying out his minority stake in my agency through a shell company Trevor had helped me establish. Richard had signed the transfer papers believing he was acquiring new investment properties. His 12% ownership had dwindled to 3% without his knowledge. All completely legal, all bearing his signature. The final piece fell into place when Richard suggested we host a dinner party for my company's executive team, something he rarely initiated. I agreed enthusiastically, knowing exactly why he wanted it. Audrey had told him I was planning to announce my retirement at year's end, information I had instructed her to accidentally reveal during one of their clandestine meetings. Richard, believing I would soon be stepping away from the company, saw an opportunity to position himself for maximum financial benefit in what he planned as an eventual divorce. He even began reaching out to my board members, ostensibly to support my transition. The dinner party was scheduled for a Saturday evening in our home. I spent the day preparing with unusual attention to detail, selecting Richard's favorite foods, chilling his preferred wine, even wearing the blue dress he'd always complimented. The perfect, unsuspecting wife. Guests arrived at 8. Trevor and his wife, my CFO and her husband, 2 board members with their spouses, and of course my dedicated assistant Audrey, who'd insisted on helping serve despite it being the weekend. Throughout cocktails, Richard was the consummate host, charming and attentive. No one would have guessed he was sleeping with the young woman refilling their champagne glasses. No one except Trevor, who watched the performance with knowing eyes. After dinner, as planned, Richard tapped his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to my brilliant wife," he announced, smiling at me with practiced adoration, "who has built an extraordinary company through vision and determination." Everyone raised their glasses as he continued, "And who deserves the absolute best as she prepares for her next chapter?" That was my cue. I stood, touching his arm affectionately. "Thank you, darling. You're right that I've been planning a significant change." I smiled at our guests. But before I share that news, I thought we could enjoy a small presentation. Trevor dimmed the lights as I activated the projection screen that descended from our dining room ceiling, an installation Richard had questioned when I had it put in months earlier. "I call this Parallel Lives," I said pleasantly, clicking the remote. The screen illuminated with a split image. On one side, Richard kissing me goodbye on our front porch with a briefcase in hand. On the other, time-stamped 20 minutes later, Richard checking into the Harbor Hotel with Audrey. Richard froze, champagne glass halfway to his lips. "Fascinating timing, isn't it?" I observed casually, advancing to the next slide. Richard at our anniversary dinner on the left. Richard and Audrey in Providence the following night on the right. The room had gone completely silent. "Olivia," Richard finally managed. "What is this?" "This," I replied evenly, "is the reason I've decided against retirement. Instead, I've established a new succession plan for the agency." I nodded to Trevor, who distributed folders to each guest. "You'll find inside the formal announcement of our leadership restructuring. I'm assuming full control of all operations, buying out all minority stakeholders, including my husband's remaining 3%. Richard's face contorted in confusion. 3%? I own 12% of the company. "You did," I corrected him. "The transactions are detailed on page 4, all bearing your signature." As he frantically flipped through the documents, I continued addressing our stunned guests. "You'll also find my formal separation announcement, along with assurances that this personal development will not affect our business operations or client relationships." I turned to Audrey, who stood rigid by the serving table. "Audrey, would you care to share your news as well?" All eyes turned to her as she stepped forward, her voice steady despite her pallor. "I've accepted a senior creative position with Apex in Chicago. My recommendation letter from Ms. Bennett is included in your packets, explaining the unusual circumstances of my departure." Richard looked between us in dawning horror, finally understanding that his mistress and his wife had formed an alliance. "How long have you known?" he whispered. "Long enough to ensure you'll leave this marriage with exactly what you deserve," I replied. "The Mercedes is yours. The rest stays with me." As our guests sat in stunned silence, I raised my glass. To new beginnings, for all of us. The aftermath unfolded with surprising dignity, at least publicly. Richard moved out that night, taking only his personal belongings and the car keys I'd tossed at his feet. Our divorce was finalized in record time, with Richard accepting the settlement terms without contest. He knew challenging me would only bring more evidence to light. Audrey left for Chicago 2 weeks later. Before she departed, she handed me a sealed envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Everything he ever told me about you. The lies, the stories, the promises." She met my eyes steadily. "I thought you should know exactly what you're leaving behind." I never opened that envelope. Some knowledge serves no purpose beyond pain, and I was finished letting Richard determine what hurt me. The company thrived in the following months. The scandal created a brief stir in industry circles, but my transparent handling of the situation, including a frank interview with Adweek about navigating personal betrayal while maintaining professional standards, actually strengthened our reputation. We became known not just for creative excellence, but for ethical leadership. Clients appreciated knowing where we stood. Trevor stepped up as my operational partner, taking over the roles Richard had neglected for years. Our working relationship deepened into something I hadn't anticipated. Not romance, but something equally valuable: genuine trust. You know, Trevor remarked 6 months after the dinner party revelation. Most people would have just fired her and divorced him. Most people react. I responded. I replied. There's a difference. Still, working with your husband's mistress for 2 months while orchestrating his downfall, that's next-level strategic thinking. I smiled. I built this company by seeing potential where others saw problems. Audrey wasn't the problem. She was collateral damage in Richard's pattern. Once I recognized that, she became an asset rather than an adversary. Speaking of Audrey, she excelled at Apex. We maintained a strange but respectful long-distance relationship, professional mentorship forged in the fire of mutual betrayal. She sent me her campaigns for feedback. I connected her with industry contacts. Neither of us ever mentioned Richard. As for Richard, he moved to Philadelphia with a pharmaceutical sales representative he met at a conference. According to mutual friends, he tells a heavily edited version of our divorce that casts him as the victim of a cold, calculating career woman. I find I don't mind. His narrative doesn't change my reality. Last week, I received an Industry Achievement Award at a ceremony in New York. As I stood at the podium looking out at a room of colleagues and competitors, I thought about the winding path that led me there. Not just professional achievements, but personal reckonings. Success isn't just about building something valuable, I told the audience. It's about knowing its true worth and being willing to protect it. Sometimes the greatest test of leadership isn't what you create, but what you refuse to let destroy you. Later that evening, a young woman approached me at the reception, clutching a portfolio and radiating nervous ambition. Ms. Bennett, I've followed your career for years. Your story is so inspiring. Which part? I asked, genuinely curious. How you rebuilt after betrayal, she replied. Most people would have been devastated, but you turned it into something powerful. I smiled, thinking of the complex choreography that had brought me to this moment. The calculated risks, the strategic patience, the willingness to sit with discomfort while waiting for the right moment to act. The secret, I told her, is recognizing when someone has underestimated you and letting them continue to do so until the precise moment when their underestimation becomes their undoing. I don't think about Richard much anymore. What exists between us now isn't hatred or even anger. It's simply the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when he tested my limits, he discovered they weren't where he thought they were. They weren't emotional boundaries to be manipulated or marital vows to be broken. My true boundary was dignity. And in the end, I didn't just defend it. I defined it on my own terms. Sometimes at night, I still wonder what might have happened if I'd confronted him immediately, if I'd followed the expected script of tears and accusations. But that would have been his story, not mine. And if there's one thing I've learned through everything, it's this. When someone tries to make you a character in their narrative, remember you're still the author of your own. And sometimes, the most satisfying plot twist is the one they